Receiving a photo from one of his lackeys, Kirishima Miyama would love the girl in it to mess up his life. In Osaka, at the Somei residence, Yoshino asks her grandfather about the latest tabloid involving the Yakuza world. Given her grandfather, Renji, was a direct descendant of the Kirigaya Yakuza, he was excited seeing the older manly image of himself. Yoshino didn't care about that though. She wanted to know why it said, "The grandchildren of the two groups have been very close for a long time. Their engagement may be just around the corner." She'd never even met the grandson of the Miyama Yakuza from Tokyo, so she wondered how she could be getting engaged to him. Turns out, her grandfather spread the rumor. Since she was 17 and always seemed so lonely, he'd been looking for a partner for her, citing the Miyama grandson to be handsome, looking just like the grandfather, Gaku. When he was young, Yoshino's grandfather was good friends with the grandfather from the Miyama family. Renji told Yoshino she was beautiful because of his genes, and it was going to waste without giving him an heir. And even though everyone in town agreed on her beauty because of her face, she was often called Hostess of Umeda, or Mrs. Divorced with Kids. Her grandfather tried to console her and encourage her to go to Tokyo to see Kirishima. She wondered if that was some kind of alias, but her grandfather assured her the boy was not a Yakuza, but a regular high schooler. Arriving at the Miyama house, she was blown away by how huge it was. Inside, she met with Gaku, and he truly was handsome in her eyes. He complimented her on looking just like Renji, and she affirmed people often say she looked just like her young grandfather, but as a woman. Nervous, however, she asked to know where Kirishima was, and turns out he was right behind her. Smiling, he introduced himself, taking her by the shoulder to show her around the house, learning it was a remote house that was renovated for her, separate from the main house. Yoshino felt bad, since she didn't know whether or not she'd truly choose to stay here, but even so, Kirishima was polite, telling her it was totally fine for her to decline living here. He figured she was being forced, saying what she thought previously, an arranged marriage between two people that have never even met before, and calling it an outdated custom. Kirishima figured this wouldn't work out, but when he heard she was coming to see him, he was really happy. Later, at Oren Private School, we learned Yoshino was so impressed with Kirishima, she transferred immediately, but couldn't shake the feeling her grandfather took advantage of her. After chatting and getting walked to class by Kirishima, she thought he really didn't seem like he was from a Yakuza family. She was relieved he was so normal. In class, she was shocked to find 3 girls wanting to talk to her. Since no one ever wanted to talk to her at her old school, they had heard she had come to school with Kirishima and wondered if she was his relative or girlfriend. Upon hearing she was neither of those, the girls slammed her desk, saying they didn't believe her. All of a sudden, Yoshino's school experience was now not so pleasant. No matter where she went, she could tell all the girls were staring at her. However, Kirishima was still wonderful. He was surprised to hear from her he was so popular, given most of the other students didn't really talk to him. But it made sense since everyone knew he was the grandson of a Yakuza. Yoshino didn't know they knew that, and now wondered if they were all afraid of him because of that. But Kirishima just smiled on, saying if the Yakuza did start anything, they could just be reported to the police and be taken care of. As long as people know that, there's no need to be afraid. Even with his explanation, Yoshino paused, wondering if Kirishima felt annoyed from the strange looks people gave him. His response became unsettling and somewhat cynical, saying, "Who knows? I haven't given it that much thought, and who cares anyways?" Yoshino was not prepared for his switch in tone, but seeing he switched back to being positive and cheerful, she disregarded it. Lying in bed that night, she got up suddenly, unable to sleep at all. She was freaking out, and reflecting on how Kirishima seemed like a different person in that small moment at the staircase. She stepped out of her room to get some water, and noticed light outside the window. Taking a peek outside, she spotted Kirishima covered in blood, but then hid from view to avoid being spotted. Heaving in panic, she now knew he was a Yakuza. At school, she just couldn't stop thinking about it, but tried to deny what she saw, convincing herself it was hallucination from lack of sleep. She then overheard some girls talking shit about her, calling her flashy and saying they were shocked if Kirishima actually liked her. One of them even made up a rumor about how she was working in the sex industry to pay off her debts while giggling. Man, what a pain. This was exactly like how it was back in Osaka. After school, while she and Kirishima were out shopping for supplies, she told him she needed to withdraw money at the convenience store and said she'd be back quickly. On her own though, she found herself surrounded by 3 men who reeked of alcohol. She wondered if she was getting hit on? In her whole life, she'd never once been approached on the streets other than by old man Mr. Imai at the shopping district. They grabbed her by the shoulder to escort her, despite her telling them someone was waiting for her, telling her not to resist. One of them was suddenly grabbed by Kirishima, who kindly told them she was shopping with him. The guy he was holding tried to grab his arm, and this is when Kirishima's expression changed, as he twisted the man's arm back and smashed a bottle over his head. The 2 other men became nervous, seeing Kirishima's twisted smile, and after taking them out, he just kept slugging one of them over and over, so much Yoshino begged him to stop. Kirishima turned, smiling, saying he'd be just a bit longer though. Patting the unconscious, beaten half-to-death man, Kirishima told the man he better remember his face, and that girl is my woman. So don't even try to talk to her if you see her again. You can tell your buddies about me in as much detail as possible. Feel free to come back for revenge. But I'll slaughter you and all of your family. Got it? The man agreed before being let down. Now walking away with Yoshino, Kirishima explained the sheltered life she experienced, given everyone in her town knew she was the granddaughter of the leader of the Some. Someone was also probably with her at all times who didn't look like a criminal. He warned her to be careful here though, since this wasn't Osaka. Before continuing, she pointed out how he still had blood on his hoodie. He didn't think much of it, deciding to take it off. And Yoshino was shocked to see his tattoos. Oh, he just forgot to mention them. But now approaching her, she slapped his hand away. She didn't mean to, he just seemed so intimidating. He sighed, saying this was all too tiresome, and he couldn't do this anymore. A surprising revelation for Yoshino. The tone changed once more, with Kirishima admitting he had high hopes for her being the granddaughter of another Yakuza gang's leader, who was beautiful. He assumed she'd been spoiled, was selfish to the core, and was supposed to be a woman who acted all high. He liked the idea of a woman who's loathed by other women. He loved the idea of being pushed around by a woman who didn't have any female friends, ignored any basic human rights, and messed him up. She sank, unable to comprehend his insane desires, and now he clarified she was more normal than he hoped for. So normal he's gotten sick of her. He thought they'd have fun for a year, but now felt she was too much of a burden. Right now, she was a completely worthless woman to him, and he asked her to at least make him some money to compensate for his time, pointing out her selling points were her face and body. He wanted her to sell them and make his money. He even tried to sell her on the idea of working in a brothel he was involved with, one where if she worked hard in, she could easily make 1,000,000 yen in 2 months. She could use the tagline, classy and clean, with lighter customer-pleasing options. But if she couldn't do that for him, he wanted her to leave, go back to Osaka, and tell her family exactly what he told her. He'd be perfectly fine to spark another gang war. Maybe they'd have him hanged. He was looking forward to the conflict. Yoshino never imagined a twisted man like Kirishima could exist in this world. She really wondered if she should go back. Checking her shoe cubby, she was shocked to see mud all over her stuff. This was her first time experiencing school bullying. She tried taking a picture of it for her grandfather, but now wondered what that'd actually do for her. Washing her shoes out in the evening, the sound of returning home to Osaka sounded so tempting. She then heard her phone ringing, and it was her grandfather, as cheerful as ever. He could tell she was sad, but told her she needed to stay there for 1 year. Even if she got bullied or played with, he told her not to come back, no matter how hard it got. He told her to spend a year making that Miyama boy fall in love with her to the point that he'd die for her. Then, after a year, she should come back and leave him without mercy. That was the most effective revenge against a man. He explained that women used to dump him all the time too, and honestly thought he was dead when 3 women threw him into the river after they found out he was playing them, with the call ending from her grandfather's chuckles. She only thought of how all the men around her were trash. Whatever though, since her grandfather insisted, she planned to do exactly as he expected. At one of his jobs, Kirishima talked with Aoi about how Yoshino's been gone for 2 weeks now. Aoi was concerned, knowing Kirishima's father would kill him, but he claimed he couldn't help it. At school the next day, Yoshina came into his classroom, surprising him since he thought she'd gone back home. She cockily reminded him he said her selling points were her face and body, so throwing her bag on his desk, she told him that's exactly what she did. 1 kidney, 4 million yen. She called some connections and got it done from a friend of a friend of a friend, having it removed by endoscopy. She smirked, telling him she was on a diet from salt for the rest of her life. Getting up and ready to go back to her class, she told him she wasn't going back to Osaka and didn't care what he did moving forward, but there would be consequences for him getting too carried away. She then called out the female students who had chastised her earlier, telling them even if she had to crawl to the floor or choke on her own blood, she'd drag them down to hell with her and f*** their lives up. Kirishima was shocked to see Yoshino's ferociousness. He quickly stopped her from leaving, and with a big smile, said he loved her, taking her aback. This was apparently one of the most thrilling experiences he's ever had in his life. He was surely convinced this feeling was love. He pulled her close, saying he wanted them to get married, and for her to mess up his life. But she wondered what was wrong with his head. And I'm wondering what's wrong with your head if you haven't liked this video or subscribed to my channel yet. It's obviously common sense. Because here at my Shoujo Weekly, I'm gonna cover all the fun stories no one's talking about. Like badass women, they're here. Like hot men, they're here too. I also live stream weekly, where we talk about interesting topics and play games. So come on, hit that subscribe, I'll be your guy. During lunch, we see Yoshino sneaking around, trying to avoid Kirishima. She just wanted to eat in peace, but it's like every free second she gets, he's suddenly there. Crap. She's feeling the pain from her kidney transplant. The stomach and stress are killing her. She felt he had some nerve telling the same girl he told to go sell her body that he loves her. On top of that, he was always smiling, so it was impossible to tell what he was thinking. But of course, he was smiling right behind her. She jolted up, wondering how he found her here, to which he answered, probably his love for her. Just kidding, though he is seriously in love. The real answer was he crammed a GPS in her electronic dictionary. She was furious, smashing her device in half. Ignoring her complaints, he was also here to tell her his father wanted to talk to them. Waiting at home, Yoshino was nervous over what this meeting could be about. However, Gaku was too busy, so Aoi and Sota came in his place. Aoi relayed to them the daughter of Akaza Enterprises' president has gone missing. They were a third-string Tokusa clan affiliate, with Miyama being second to the main clan. She could have just run away or been kidnapped, which wouldn't be a big deal to them, except now they had Yoshino here. So, she was thus ordered to be with Kirishima 24/7 until the Akaza daughter was found. News she was not too eager to hear. Instead of keeping her safely at the house though, Kirishima took Yoshino out for dinner, where he happily watched her eat. All his watching was giving her a headache, so she decided to ask what he really even liked about her, adding that if he thought there was any chance she could fall for him, he probably had flowers growing where he ought to have brain cells. Kirishima just responded in laughter, saying he loved everything about her, but especially her sharp tongue. Despite how nice he was though, she could still feel a threatening aura from him. But also, no one has ever said they liked her before, so she had no basis for comparison. He then presented the photo of the missing daughter, Shiori Akazawa, 20 years old and attends a junior college in Kanagawa. Yoshino couldn't help but ask if her tattoos were real. We learned from Kirishima he chatted with her 2 years ago at a funeral for a consultant to the main family. Shiori was your typical spoiled rich girl. Yoshino wondered if she should be worried if either of them were in danger of being kidnapped as well. However, Kirishima doubted it, since he himself was not related to the patriarch Gaku directly. Gaku decided to not have any kids, meaning no grandkids either. He's actually Kirishima's real grandfather's older brother. But when Kirishima was 12, he caused trouble and Gaku was the only one he could turn to. After taking a quick phone call, Kirishima received the news that one of Akaza Enterprises' men died. The body belongs to an associate member of Akaza Enterprises. He started out as a host and ended up running a handful of restaurants around the city. In particular, he ran gaming rooms and Shiori was a regular at one of those rooms. The killings made sense, since the Tokusa clan only dominated 70% of Tokyo. rest by another. It had been about a 100-year bloody stalemate against enemy turf. Yoshino gets a ride after school after buying a new hairdryer. It's there. Sota explains he'd never had a proper conversation with Kirishima. The first time the two had met was apparently middle school, and he had heard prior that Kirishima had a violent incident in the 5th grade. It was a big enough deal that his parents weren't able to handle it on their own. So, Gaku took care of it, and that's how Kirishima ended up in the family. There were 20 other kids altogether, both classmates and older students with their bones snapped. This was unnerving to hear for Yoshino. Taking a brief stop in traffic, Yoshino noticed the rose-printed tattoos. She spotted Shiori. Sneaking around inside the building Shiori went into, Yoshino called Kirishima. He commented her being missing must have been BS. Her father had been hard to track down lately as well. They were probably both trying to lay low. However, Kirishima didn't explain why. He could now see though the club was Nox Tokyo, a non-Takusa turf that belongs to the Kirigaya Gumi. Coincidentally, that was one of Yoshino's families. It now made sense why no one knew where Shiori was, since Kirishima's family wouldn't be here at all. Hearing that Kirishima and Yoshino decided to retrieve Shiori, Gaku let them go. At the club, Yoshino was not a fan of the loud noise, but Kirishima had no problem guiding her around. Inside the VIP room, we learn Shiori is going overseas for a while. She's apparently glad to be here, having been fed up with people watching her all the time because of her father. The reason she's leaving is because she was caught cheating at the Baccarat tables with the dead Akaza Enterprise member. And against the Filipino Mafia too. She cheated out 500 million yen and had no choice but to pay these guys for protection. Kirishima then kicked the door open, having heard everything. After introducing himself, he walked right over their table, casually sitting beside a girl telling them he meant no harm, but knew Shiori's father was now trying to lay low as well, because his daughter ripped off $500 million from the Filipino mob. He told Shiori to come join him at the Miyama office, because right now, she was causing too much trouble for the main family. But oh man, there are more Kirigaya Gumi men right behind Yoshino, who smacked her aside. Kirishima did not take this kindly, deciding to assault the men he was near right away. He immediately jabbed a fork into one of them. No way was he gonna let someone disrespect his girl. A brawl began. Yoshino was in pain, but seeing Kirishima beating the men up, she remembered what she heard about his past. Wondering how the man before her could hit someone with all his strength. She felt weak and didn't want to feel this way any longer. Kirishima continued his relentless assault, getting stabbed from behind with a knife. And as someone else was coming from behind him with a bottle, Yoshino smashed her new hairdryer right on the man. She was pissed, telling the man to die. Kirishima was angered that the man made his girl bleed, so he continuously punched the man in the face over and over. Yoshino hit Kirishima on the head, explaining there was no need to kill someone over a little blood. She then spotted Shiori, hoping she wasn't dead. However, Kirishima didn't care if she was. He was too depressed, seeing Yoshino bleeding. Later, we learned President Akaza got away with just being expelled, and his daughter ultimately did end up overseas, since she wasn't safe in Japan. Kirishima also received a beating, since he made a bunch of trouble on the Kirigaya Gumi turf. But he happily gave Yoshino 10 million yen. It was his cut of the 500 mil split between the Filipino Mafia and his family. In exchange for finding the girl and President Akaza, they decided to split the money down the middle and call it a day. He wanted to give it to Yoshino since she sold her kidney the other day. Plus, he didn't know how to show he was being sincere outside of giving cash. If that wasn't going to work, he'd be fine selling his corneas. Yoshino didn't need his money or corneas, however. She just needed a new hairdryer and for him to come along, to which he happily complied. However, Kirishima spotted a man outside the school on a motorcycle. A man who, taking off his helmet, continued to stare at them. One who, even though Kirishima tried to cheerfully ignore talking to Yoshino, he was still in the back of his mind. One evening, the girl Kirishima's been fooling around with asks if he's gotten a girlfriend. He gets excited, wanting to tell her about Yoshino. However, the girl wonders if this really was the appropriate time to talk about another girl to her. He showed her the picture and boy, she couldn't stand Yoshino's look. She told Kirishima to give up on Yoshino, assuming she hated him and that maybe she had a guy she likes back in Osaka. But then, Kirishima answers competing for her would only make things more thrilling. Trying to sleep, Yoshino could feel someone watching her. Half asleep, she thought it was her grandfather at first, but then remembered this was Tokyo. She woke up, eyes wide, wondering if that was all a dream, but now realizing it must have been Kirishima. But how could he have gotten in if she locked all the doors? She then thought about what he wanted with her. Could he have finally gotten tired of her enough to warrant killing her? About to drink her water, she gets annoyed with herself for getting used to his eccentricity without becoming even a little bit upset. She's becoming desensitized. She's now decided to change the lock on the front door and keep her kitchen knife close for self-defense. Trying to sleep tonight, she could totally tell he's here, and he had blood on his face. Whatever he was gonna try, she was ready with her knife. However, she was shocked to feel him braiding her hair. She was at her limit and couldn't take it anymore. She tried to strike with her knife, but he caught her and pinned her to the ground. Now he was saying she scared him because he had no idea she was awake. But of course, she was the one scared of him. He picked her up and apologized. Then she bopped him on the head, calling him annoying. She wanted to know what was going on and how he got in here. To which he explained he duplicated the key with aluminum a while ago. Completely irritated, Yoshino told him it was time for a lecture. She started telling him he couldn't just come and go into her room as he pleased. Not because it was common sense, but simply because she didn't like it, and he accepted. He then answered why he was sneaking around in her room at night. It's because he's only seen her face when she was mad at him, and someone told him she might hate him. So, he wanted to see her sleeping face, because surely no one could be mad while sleeping. And he could look at her as much as he wanted. She replied of course she was mad at him all the time. All he did was commit crime. But now she was concerned about him looking beaten today. He just laughed it off, saying he got punished by Aoi for staying out past his 1 AM curfew, which he almost never obeyed, by the way. Yoshino considered being less angry with him if he started coming home by curfew. One of her gripes with him is he never followed a single rule, and also, he's been playing around with other girls. She could tell he was a liar, just like her grandfather. One thing that crossed Kirishima's mind was the fact that Yoshino noticed all this, and yet she wasn't angry about it. In her mind though, it was none of her business. But if a guy she actually liked cheated on her, she'd kill him. So by that logic, Kirishima was now determined to make her want to kill him. He was happy every day with her by his side. In fact, he always wanted to come home as soon as possible because she was here. And he thought going to school was fun because she's with him. He wondered if she hated him. But she explained she wasn't avoiding him because she hated him. She avoided him because she had no idea what he was gonna do. He usually refused to do things he was uninterested in. But when he did do something, he always went all in. She found it refreshing that he didn't put on airs and was always consistent. Those were his good points in her eyes. For now, she was gonna put a bandage on his wounds. But before she could, he pinned her down saying, "I love you too," and that he'd try his best to get her to kill him when he cheats on her. Not the most romantic display of affection in my opinion. On another day, we see Yoshino watering the garden when Kirishima brings her mail from Osaka. He had also gotten a letter from her grandfather, since he sent Renji an apology letter for letting her get injured that night they went to Knox, Tokyo. Her mail was a request for her father's album photos. Her father was quite weak when it came to fights, and he hated Yakuza. Often even argued a lot with her grandfather and left home right after high school and got married. He died in a traffic accident before she was born, so she actually didn't even know how it felt to have a father. Setting the dark childhood past aside, Kirishima explains her grandfather is coming to Tokyo the day after tomorrow for the Goryeo League's meeting. With all the Yakuza leaders meeting, we learn the Kanto Goryeo League is a fellowship of political organizations in the Kanto region. They have a dinner party 4 times a year where top executives of the member organizations get together. It's like a summit for the heads of state. Kirishima presented some photos from the league in the past, and Yoshino spotted his grandfather from when he was younger standing next to hers. She was shocked at how much Kirishima looked just like Gaku. She was also surprised to see how well her grandfather and his seemed to get along back then. Kirishima added they definitely got along, given his grandpa hated cameras. So they only have these 10 photos of him from when he was young, but in all 10, he's with Renji. After the league meeting, we see Renji trying to chit-chat with Gaku, telling Gaku he sounds sleepy and like a wet rag. He then started stuffing black candy he got at the station into Gaku's pockets, despite Gaku protesting. Elsewhere, we see the mysterious guy who was on the motorcycle on the phone with Yoshino. Apparently, he was the one who retrieved her father's photos from Osaka and mailed them to her. She wanted him to check her old room again to retrieve more. On another day, she decided to meet with Takeru Hote, a member of her father's house. He was close to her grandfather and often a bodyguard. He apologized on her grandfather's behalf as he headed home yesterday. He was a busy man. Takeru was curious about Kirishima, and she had no idea how to describe him except with the words masochist, destructive, womanizer, and fake smile. But instead of all that, she just nervously responded Kirishima was mentally strong. Yoshino was surprised to hear Takeru suggesting she bring Kirishima back during summer break. He knew she might find this overbearing. However, Takeru was the one who basically raised her in childhood, since her grandfather was often too busy. Takeru just wanted to see what kind of man he was entrusting her to. She knew though that Kirishima was so eccentric, he'd be willing to fly to Osaka tomorrow. Then suddenly, Shoma Toriyashi arrived. She took him shopping because visiting, he didn't bring any extra clothes with him. With an expressionless look, he told her he was only here to bring her the album, which she thanked him for, but wanted him to have extra clothes since he was staying the night. While he changed, we learn her grandfather took him in during his junior high years after picking a fight with him. After changing, he suddenly came out shirtless, telling the cashier he was ready to buy. However, Yoshino told him to have common sense and put a shirt back on at least. In his private study, Kirishima stares at a photo of Shoma. This was part of his research. We then turned to Shoma eating happily. Yoshino pulled up his sleeve, telling him he needed to hide his tattoos properly. He then asked about Kirishima, to which Yoshino replied she was going to follow her grandfather's plan to make him fall in love with her, and then ditch him. Shoma then added a further purpose she was here for, possibly involving a feud with another Yakuza gang. However, he wasn't totally sure. That night, the two went into Shoma's hotel room. Yoshino wanted to rest since she had overeaten from the buffet. She conveyed the complexity of things, always trying to get the better of Kirishima, always being ready to kill him before he kills her, trying not to show a bit of weakness to him. That's all she ever thinks about every day. But in the end, Kirishima is the only guy she can trust in Tokyo. She was always caught off guard by him, because no matter how much time she spent with him, she never knew his real face. She felt tired, and honestly wished to go back to Osaka with Shoma right now. Shoma had no problem with this idea. If all that was needed was for Kirishima to disappear, Shoma was willing to kill him for her. Yoshino was taken aback, thinking there was no need to go that far. However, Shoma thought things might be better off if Kirishima was dead. She still denied the request, so he was fine waiting until she changed her mind. Smoking outside, Kirishima came by to tell him there was no smoking allowed on this road, then told him, "Nice to meet you, Shoma Toriyashi," while introducing himself. Kirishima lets him know this isn't the first time they've met, and that he's here to pick up Yoshino. Shoma asks if Kirishima was tailing them, but Kirishima doesn't really answer, instead picking at Shoma's inability to notice if he was. Kirishima, with his usual smile, explains he's not here to fight, especially not with one of Yoshino's family members. And if the two were to wed, Shoma would become his brother-in-law. Shoma hates that idea and asks who Kirishima is working for, to which Kirishima responds he knew Renji most likely had no intention of letting him marry Yoshino. He knew, and still accepted the potential matchmaking anyways, and wanted to remain by Yoshino's side because he was in love with her. Then, Yoshino came scurrying down, asking why Kirishima was here, but with him up close, she quickly concluded she needed to see his phone. And looking at it, it was exactly what she thought. Kirishima cloned a version of her phone and was using it to pull location data from her. She told him he could just call her if he wanted to know, and he complied without worry, agreeing to do that from now on. About to take her leave, Shoma grabs her arm, telling her she should come back with him to Osaka after all, because no matter how you look at it, it was clear to him Kirishima was insane. But then, Kirishima grabbed her next, certain she wouldn't leave, remarking he was the best person for her to marry. Shoma couldn't believe this, given everything Kirishima had done up to this point. And even though Kirishima played dumb, Shoma started with the fact that he was clearly a stalker. Hearing Kirishima saying, "An outsider like you doesn't have any say in this," Yoshino told him to watch his mouth. To her, Shoma was family, no matter what, and she in turn called Kirishima the outsider here. Kirishima was caught by surprise, and he apologized. The next morning, Yoshino ran to Tokyo Station to meet Shoma before his trip back. With her arrival, he looked around, asking where Kirishima was, and she believed he was most likely at home since she didn't tell him she was coming here. Yoshino pointed out how clear it was that Shoma didn't like Kirishima, since he's always hated guys who were too talkative. The two of them thought Kirishima was crazy. However, Yoshino remained in order to follow her grandfather's advice. She wanted to come out of this situation the winner. But still, Shoma remarked he didn't understand. He felt like if she was going to throw away her own rules and pride, she might as well throw away her life. As the train arrived, her answer to this was that she couldn't throw away her honor and pride, and if she did, she'd have nothing left. Hearing she was willing to die for her pride caused Shoma's eyes to widen. He wouldn't be willing to die for something like that. But when she asked him what he was willing to die for, he pointed at her. She was surprised by his response, but then surprised once again to hear him say she had a bug in her hair. He pulled it out, learning it wasn't a bug, but instead breadcrumbs from what she ate this morning. Seeing him off, Shoma suddenly hugs Yoshino, promising to come back, while she told him to do good in college. This all occurred while Kirishima was watching them in secret. The next day, on the way to school, the train ride was packed because of an elementary school sports festival event going on. More people crowded, causing Kirishima to get close to Yoshino. She could feel his body heat and noticed he smelled really good. She opened up to Kirishima about how back in Osaka, she was practically always chauffeured to and from school, except in middle school, when she used to walk with Shoma, and the mention of his name brought up Kirishima's bloodlust aura. However, when Yoshino turned to look at him, he had on his usual smile as if nothing happened. In class, she kept thinking about it. It was like that same look he gave her that one time on the staircase. She wondered if that meant he was bored of her again. She now reflected on the fact that she hadn't made any effort to make Kirishima fall in love with her. Later that night, while sorting her clothes, she kept thinking about how Kirishima was so unpredictable. Just thinking about him pissed her off. And there he was at her door, asking what was pissing her off. Turns out, he was here to deliver her a package from Osaka, and learning she was just sorting out her clothing to wear for the summer, he seemed somewhat cold, initially thinking she was packing to return home. She could feel his pressure. She turned around, questioning if he wanted to kill her now, but that wasn't the case at all. And he hadn't gotten bored of her either. So, she asked if he hated Shoma, to which he responded he wasn't sure about that either, since he'd never disliked anyone before. She added what if she told him that she and Shoma were dating, and shockingly, Kirishima wouldn't mind, answering that sometimes he gets girls to cheat on him. He wanted one condition though. He didn't care if she dated someone else. He just wanted her to do it all in front of him. He brought up the saying of carrot on a stick, but he didn't care for the carrot. He was more interested in the stick itself. This only applied to someone he felt equal to, and since he was the only one in love here, he couldn't win against Yoshino. He believed the carrot and the stick needed to be exactly equal. So, if she kissed her lover or made love, he wanted it all in front of him. She could even tie him to a pillar or something similar. And at the end of it all, Kirishima would kill the man as his way of balancing everything out. She called him insane. It sounded as if he was jealous. This is something he now took in as a realization, that perhaps jealousy drove him insanely crazy. He then tried offering to play the part of a normal guy, like she always wanted, and she coldly asked him if he was just going to flip his way of life to please a woman. She sighed, deciding to spill her motives since she felt like she was being unfair. She admitted she was going to dump him after a year and go back to Osaka, but now she's made up her mind that if by any chance she did fall in love with him, she'd continue to live in Tokyo. He was surprised to hear she believes he'd act well to be her ideal man, but she clarified this wasn't her saying that would make her fall in love with him. He wasn't sure what to do with this information, so she shouted, telling him instead of pretending to be a halfway decent human being, he should go wild and be the craziest man in the world. He took a breath of relief, admitting he was afraid that one day he'd get tired of her, but now he was eccentric, saying he loved her more than ever and that he'd always love her. She then told him to hurry off because he was giving her a headache. She was going to change and have dinner now. On another morning, Yoshino found herself with a low temperature. Just like in her childhood, she always caught summer colds. Feeling a massive headache, she decided to take the day off from school and told Kirishima there was no need to check up on her. Kirishima rang her doorbell anyway, much to her annoyance, and he was sweating heavily from having rushed to get her supplies. After cooling himself off, he explained he wasn't going to school so he could take care of her, but she said she'd be fine if she just rested. When he offered to take her to the hospital, she declined that as well since she hated hospitals, and pushed him away so he could make it to class on time. He turned to tell her he'd text message her every hour and that he'd be home soon. He really was a needy guy. During lunch, after learning Yoshino's fever went up a bit, he tried to call her, getting no response. He decided to leave early, but first, he had to deal with a job from one of his clients named Sagawa. Kirishima ended up calling Aoi to send someone to take care of it, because he wanted to hurry back to Yoshino. Sagawa became frightened, believing Kirishima wasn't Yakuza. But of course, none of that mattered to Kirishima. Arriving at Yoshino's place at night, he rang the doorbell, getting no response. So he picked her door lock and found her heaving heavily. Despite her whining, he took her temperature, while apologizing for returning so late. Seeing her fever was definitely worse, he called for a car, picked her up, and on the ride to the hospital, unknowing of what was happening, all Yoshino could think about was the good smells that exuded off of him. The next morning, Kirishima let Renji know everything was fine with Yoshino, and that he would take care of her, even if he had to be a stalker. Renji was fine with this. On Renji's end, while heading out for business, Shoma stared at his boss leaving, determined to figure out what his aim in all this truly was. Yoshino finally wakes up around noon, noticing her fever has gone totally down, but is shocked to find Kirishima sitting right beside her, who has been by her side since they returned from the hospital. Remembering the embarrassing expressions she made while being sick, she apologized to Kirishima, who had to see them. Kirishima tries to leave, but she stops him. She knows he probably hadn't eaten, having stayed with her all night, so she offered to thank him with udon. Returning back to school, Yoshino becomes depressed, realizing she's screwed. They only had 2 days left before exams. She was especially not good at math. Kirishima offered to help her, since he didn't study much himself outside of school. He just did his assignments and went over all his notes and textbooks while in class. Learning this made Yoshino more depressed, now understanding how stupid she was in comparison. How was she going to get into college struggling even with the most basic math? Kirishima was fine with that though. Assuming they'd get married, he'd just do all the calculations for her. Now remembering something important, Yoshino brought up how she was going to Yokohama on the last day of exams, because her cousin was moving there from Tokyo. Kirishima accompanied Yoshino at the station that day, wanting to make sure she and her cousin were safe. He already had quite a bit of intel as well, knowing Yoshino's father and her cousin's mother were half-siblings, and that the cousin was 1 year older, about to attend college. Yoshino explains her family's complicated lineage. Her cousin's mother was the daughter of one of Renji's mistresses. Additionally, the mistress suddenly turned back up when her aunt turned 10, so there's a bit of ambiguity as to whether or not there's actual blood relation. Renji never questioned it though, having raised her aunt anyway. Kirishima then brought up Yoshino's cousin majoring in international studies. Her background was closer to that of a typical rich girl. Finally making it to her, Tsubaki Akashigata happily greeted her cousin. Tsubaki's form of compliment was to say Yoshino still had a lovely face like their grandfather's, which Yoshino didn't really understand. Tsubaki then greeted Kirishima, and Yoshino used this opportunity to sell her cousin as his type. A genuine young, fashionable lady with white, big dark eyes and long black hair. She possessed a beauty other girls would be jealous of. Kirishima's response was that it was a pleasure to meet a beautiful woman like her, and Tsubaki was impressed by how nice and handsome he was. Making their way, the three continued to converse about Tsubaki's background, notably the fact that she had a bit of a country accent being from Kyoto. Yoshino was surprised with Tsubaki's move, since her entire female lineage was from Kyoto, both her mother and grandmother. There's even an urban legend about how Kyoto women marry late, because they love Kyoto so much and don't want to marry outside the prefecture. Seeing some sandals in a windowsill, Tsubaki was going to recommend them to Yoshino. However, Kirishima beat her to it. Yoshino thought they were cute, but then figured she'd be too tall with heels, although Kirishima didn't really mind. Later, Yoshino got a little overfull, having gone overboard eating a bun, then shark fin ramen, followed by dim sum. Tsubaki felt nostalgic hearing this, apparently because Yoshino had always been the type to overeat till she was sick. Tsubaki continued to praise Yoshino's looks comparatively to Renji's. She loved everything about their grandfather, remarking him to be perfect and charming in his appearance, face, and body shape. A work of art created by God himself. However, to Kirishima, Yoshino was even more perfect. What are they even trying to compete in? Sitting down at the table, Tsubaki warned Yoshino to be careful of men who have big mouths, referring to Kirishima, claiming they were the type to cheat. Although Yoshino brought up Tsubaki really didn't have room to speak, as she herself was the promiscuous type. Tsubaki blushed, saying with how busy she was these days, she didn't have time to see as many guys. Only 3 at the moment, while not counting the hookups that come and go. Tsubaki was curious about how far Yoshino and Kirishima have gone. Like, doing it. But Kirishima knew even if he tried, both Yoshino and her relatives would kill him for sure. He was happy getting put off like this though. Tsubaki then brought up she wouldn't mind having a man that Yoshino had her first time with, saying they'd be Rod sisters. What is wrong with this girl? With Yoshino stepping away to get some dessert, Kirishima and Tsubaki had a private talk. Tsubaki pointed out the obvious differences between how he treated her and Yoshino. For starters, she could tell he didn't enjoy talking to her in the slightest, and was just going along with whatever she said. Kirishima was then going to bring up something he wanted to know about Tsubaki, but before he could, Yoshino returned joyously with her mango-shaved ice. Heading back for the evening, Yoshino gets a call from her teacher. Apparently, she forgot to turn in some of her important math homework. She remembered leaving the papers in her textbook. Learning she had until 8 p.m. to turn it in, Kirishima quickly ushered her to a taxi, where at the car door, he told her he'd escort Tsubaki back to her hotel. The two spoke privately in a Ferris wheel. Kirishima knew Tsubaki's father was the director of the Kyoto Dosekai Hospital under the Dosekai Group, which had very unpleasant rumors swirling around them regarding the funding of politicians, connections to crime groups, and most notably, illegal organ transplants. He got straight to the point, asking her where Yoshino's kidney was right now. He himself felt like selling his kidney for Yoshino, since Yoshino did it for him. But in scouring the black market, he couldn't find her kidney anywhere, concluding that Tsubaki never extracted Yoshino's kidney in the first place, and instead just paid her 4 million yen. He spotted her surgical scar the night he took care of her above her hip. He knew the 2 ways to confirm if the kidney was really gone was either having Yoshino do an MRI scan, or to hear it from Tsubaki herself. Tsubaki questioned why Kirishima was so obsessed with Yoshino. He couldn't really say though, only claiming his obsession was out of love for her. Tsubaki then revealed buying 1500 milliliters of blood from Yoshino in exchange for the 4 mil. She had Yoshino drained until she nearly died, not telling her she kept the blood. Tsubaki felt bad now that she broke her promise not to tell anyone about it. Kirishima questioned why Tsubaki did that, since the blood drain could have debilitated Yoshino forever. To which Tsubaki answered she tried to persuade Yoshino not to go through with the surgery. However, Yoshino told her she'd rather die than have Kirishima look down on her. Tsubaki felt it would be unfair not to risk Yoshino's life after her determined words. The two got off the Ferris wheel, where Kirishima thanked her for the talk and said she was as charming as Yoshino. Tsubaki once again complimented his smooth talk and playboy inclinations, but more sarcastically. If he ever hurt her cousin though, she'd make sure he'd never see Yoshino again. The next day, Yoshino was happily watering her garden, since she turned her assignments in on time. She asked Kirishima what he and Tsubaki talked about, but he refused to answer. He then suddenly got a message from Tsubaki, sending him a picture of Yoshino eating in a bikini like she promised. Yoshino was flabbergasted, frantically telling him to delete it now, thinking he'd use it for blackmail and put it on the internet if she went against him. But he'd never do that. He just wants her for himself. Tsubaki, in exchange, previously received a picture of Renji in his youth with Gaku, exactly what she asked for. One night while studying, Yoshino and Tsubaki chat over the phone. We learned from Tsubaki that Kirishima had gone to Osaka to meet Yoshino back when he was 12, but couldn't actually meet her in person. Tsubaki speculates on the idea that he may have been interested in her since then. Yoshino didn't believe that though, still pretty sure Kirishima didn't really like her, and assumed even if she did fall in love with him, he'd lose interest in her instantly. She felt he was more obsessed with her rather than anything else. But if she pointed that out, he might fix his obsession, and then she'd be even more confused about his true intentions. It was honestly easier for her if he just stayed crazy. Tsubaki suggests Yoshino figure out whether or not Kirishima actually loves her or is just obsessed. Because if it really was the latter, then she'd have problems even if she returned to Osaka. With summer break starting tomorrow, Yoshino was stressed as she contemplated how she could figure out whether Kirishima liked her or was just obsessed with her. Meeting up with him, 2 other female classmates run away at the sight of Yoshino. He explains the 2 were telling him about an open campus in the school during the break, and they were discussing what to do during that time. It was the job of the disciplinary committees to handle visitors. Yoshino was mind blown to discover he, of all people, was a part of the disciplinary committee, considering he never followed the rules. She initially thought the 2 girls were confessing to him. However, he explained there's no way, since during his freshman year, he always refused and gained the reputation as a person who always turned someone down. Besides, he didn't need anyone else. Yoshino was enough for him, being the first friend he's ever made. She was surprised to hear this, considering all the 2 ever did was talk about food in the news. But in contrast, women always talked to him despite the fact he never talked to them. He only had these kind of trivial conversations with her. Yoshino now could only think about how maybe Kirishima didn't see her as a romantic partner, and she might have been pointlessly contemplating this situation. At an event, now Shiota is the topic of conversation for many, given she was a child actress in a TV drama, won a beauty pageant last year, and was a well-known student broadcaster. She was being congratulated by the ladies sitting with her for getting the position as an announcer for a TV station. Some of the girls spotted her ex, Ozu, and questioned why she broke up with such a handsome guy, to which she answered he didn't like the fact that she was entering beauty pageants, and the girls laughed and giggled in agreement with her decision. Now despised these women. She knew all of them were calling her a schemer behind her back. She personally felt there was nothing wrong with scheming, since it got people to like her. After all, it made her the most successful in her friend group. The girls then spotted Kirishima, someone now had a particular past with. He ended up stopping by, making pleasant small talk while pretending he was meeting now for the first time. In the bathroom, she thought back to their fling, which occurred only for a short time when she had come back to Japan during summer vacation, as she had spent a lot of her high school life in America due to her family's businesses. She was basically in his bed every night, even though she knew how dangerous he was. The 2 greeted each other in the hall later, recounting their time together over 3 years ago. He has no intention of telling anyone about their history. He remarked she's changed a lot, as he remembered her being the type to speak her mind more. He told her she shouldn't try too hard to fit in, and then gave her his contact info on the back of a business card of a high societal connection. Later, Yoshino calls Kirishima to invite him to go with her to the Bond Festival back in Osaka. He accepts, wanting to go in July, since now would be there for a cosmetics event. We move to the day where they arrive in Osaka, and it seems Yoshino's made him carry all her new purchases. Riding in the cab together, Kirishima pointed out how pleasing it was to see her smile, which irritated her a little. She stopped the cab suddenly, seeing Shoma casually drinking ramune while getting ready to eat takoyaki. She wondered how he could eat the deep-fried dish in this summer heat. And oh no, seeing Kirishima was provoking him, she had to make an excuse quickly to dispel the tension. Pulling out a cigarette, the shop owner smacked Shoma, scolding him because she didn't want him to spill ash in front of her store. He points out she's smoking too, but that didn't matter to her since it was her store. The shop owner exchanged pleasantries with Yoshino, but was surprised to see the handsome Kirishima, asking if he was her boyfriend, which she denied. Some more ladies called him stylish, saying he looked like a young actor. They were just as surprised to hear he was from Tokyo, and everyone started laughing joyously over some jokes. And man, Kirishima was smooth, calling these older women beautiful, and they were really charmed. Shoma took another smacking, with the shop owner telling him he should be more likable like Kirishima. The older women then started gifting Kirishima a little money before riding off. Man, guys with nice faces get all the free stuff. Still, Shoma was wary of him. Elsewhere in Osaka, now was hearing not so good news about her ex Ozu. She initially dated him because he was the son of an executive at Embrace Productions, while his mother was a freelance announcer. There was a criminal case involving a friend of Ozu's, who potentially had trafficked the woman. Hearing this, now thought of calling Kirishima for help. At Yoshino's house, the Somei Yakuza nervously greeted Kirishima. Yoshino brought him to her room, which he looked around quite curiously. He became interested in a little trinket she had sewn together in elementary school. He held it tight, asking to keep it, so she gave it to him. Downstairs, Shoma then called for her to deal with some food prep, so while she stepped away, Kirishima got a text from Nao, who was hoping to catch up with him. Later that night after dinner, Kirishima tells the two he's going to head out because he reserved a hotel nearby, and he'd be back at her house tomorrow morning. While shopping, Shoma tells Yoshino she has too loose of a leash on Kirishima. She needs to keep a tighter one, given there's no telling what he might do. In bed, Nao sees Kirishima's back tattoos, but he assures her there's nothing to worry about since he isn't a Yakuza. She asks him what he's doing here in Osaka, and he smiles, telling her he came to see her. But she smacks him because she knows he's lying. He wonders why she messaged him, but she told him there wasn't a particular reason. She just felt like seeing him again. After explaining he's hanging around with a person he might like, Kirishima heads to the shower. But then, getting a notification on his phone, Nao sees the picture of Yoshino. Morning comes, and we see Kirishima has decided to tag along with Yoshino on a ride to visit a university. Since she believes there's a high chance she'll return to Osaka, she thought it'd be a good idea to tour. To which Kirishima jokes he'd already been dumped. But of course, it's not like they've been dating. Taking the house key she gave him, she attaches it to a new trinket she made, saying the old one he took was dusty. She wanted to give him this new one she had made last night. At the college campus, we find Nao being guided around by two boys who were fans of hers. We learn they'll all be going to the same party together. One of the boys brings up how her friend Miku told them she had just come home in the morning, and there was a rumor about her seeing some guy. She denies it matter-of-factly, and breathing a deep sigh on the bus, she thinks to herself there's no way she'd fall in love with someone as awful as Kirishima, especially knowing he had a picture of another girl on his phone when he slept with her. However, when her bus passes by that girl and Kirishima, she finds herself getting off to go after him. Kirishima had gone his own way, so while she chose to tail Yoshino, two girls who were big fans came up to ask her for selfies. Then suddenly, Yoshino comes right up to Nao to ask her something. Walking together, Yoshino apologizes to her. She thought Nao was attending this university and wanted to ask for her guidance here, since Nao had just got done talking to two high school girls. Nao thought nothing of it, making the excuse that they were both probably going the same direction. Looking at Yoshino, Nao reflects on the fact that other girls stare at herself all the time, and observes that it's like Yoshino doesn't even care if she's better than other women. She finds Yoshino distasteful. Nao then brings up that she's actually from Tokyo, and had seen Yoshino with someone she knew. When Yoshino brings up how surprised she was that Nao knows Kirishima, Nao thinks Yoshino is stupid for just saying his first name so openly and easily. Nao tells Yoshino she wasn't that close to him, but they had gone to the same private school. They then talk about the incident that involved Kirishima beating up a lot of other students, and he had supposedly trained at a famous karate dojo near their school. With their conversation coming to an end, Yoshino grabs Nao's line number before she leaves. At home, she asks Shoma if he knows anything about Nao, but he has no idea. Hearing Yoshino was going to visit the university again tomorrow, Shoma mentions tagging along, since his exam was tomorrow. But this frustrates her enough to throw her pillow at him. She wants him to study for his exam for once instead of lazing around and eating. But since he wasn't going to study, she invited him to go out with her for the night. Elsewhere, Nao was staring at Yoshino's line contact, thinking Yoshino was flashy but stupid. She wondered if Kirishima had different taste in women these days. Her ex Ozu then comes by to harass her. We learn he has been introducing what he called wannabe actresses and models who didn't have any real prospects to rich patrons. He took a fee for making the connections. She's then surprised to hear he knew she slept with Kirishima. He claims to have picture and video evidence. He then brings up that she smoked marijuana while she was in America. She continues to deny the allegations, but to Ozu, it didn't matter whether or not she really did those things. He could make it sound like she did. He blackmailed her, saying if she didn't want those rumors leaked, She needed to bring Kirishima and Yoshino to a specific location without letting them know what was going on. He then told her not to feel guilty about selling Kirishima out, since Kirishima was the one who spread those rumors in the first place. The next day, Yoshino decided to give Kirishima a tour around Osaka instead of visiting the campus again. It was like they were on a date. They went to the local aquarium. The two talked about various things, like Yoshino's favorite food, which included ramen, udon, dango, mochi, and most things with sweet cream. The most surprising thing for Kirishima was learning she had her driver's license. He already had a lot of intel on her, which is displayed by him mentioning her exact birthday on April 2nd. But he didn't talk about himself or his interests much. Yoshino decides to snap pictures of the sharks, since her grandfather likes her taking pictures of things wherever she goes. But trying to get a candid photo of Kirishima, he notices, catching her off guard. In an effort to learn more about him, she asks when Kirishima got his first girlfriend. He tells her it was the 6th grade, but called the girl more of a patron than a girlfriend. His grandfather only gave him a certain amount of food for lunch, which was usually never enough. So in middle school, he'd often look for girls who'd give him money, but never really officially dated anyone. Talking about hobbies and favorite foods, Kirishima felt like he was meeting for an arranged marriage. But that's exactly why Yoshino was asking. She thought it was weird that they skipped out on these things during their arrangement. She still had no plans on marrying him, but felt it wasn't fair to stay ignorant about him either. Either way, she was determined to wait these remaining 8 months to see things through. He then suddenly grabs her hands, surprising her, and now their faces are drawn in close. But before he can say how he feels, Kirishima gets a ring on his phone. He apologizes but has to step aside for sudden business. Back at her place, Yoshino explains Kirishima's sudden leave to Shoma, so he offers to stake out Kirishima's hotel building. But with Yoshino getting a sudden message, she decides to take care of things herself. Shoma questions if she's getting attached to Kirishima, but she tells him not at all. If he's getting into trouble and gonna die, she wants to beat him up and punish him for bailing on their date first. We find Nao sitting at the windowsill in Kirishima's hotel room. He tries to console her, bringing up how she seemed down and telling her now she was more important than how busy he was. So she questions if she's more important than Yoshino, and brings up how the two met at the university just yesterday. But she was now shocked to find out he already knew. He was just surprised the two exchanged contact info. Now though, his tone became more arrogant, having anticipated the two girls would have run into each other. When he was in the shower the other day, he sent himself a text on his phone, knowing Nao would look at it and see his screensaver of Yoshino. Nao was pissed. She wanted Kirishima to die, but everything was going according to his plans. He and Ozu had done a lot of things to women to make money off of them. However, it was Ozu who made explicit videos of the women and was having them disappear. He didn't like that Ozu was conniving behind his back, but he knew Ozu was already trying to use Nao to get at him and sell her off. Kirishima put his clothes on and told her to bring him to where Ozu wanted him. He was going to settle everything tonight. Nao then became worried about Yoshino, claiming she had already sent her the message of where to go. But he wasn't worried since he had a copy of her phone and he had told Yoshino to go somewhere else instead. However, what he wasn't expecting was for Yoshino to call him and instead be exactly where Ozu was. Sitting down with Ozu were the two guys Kirishima beat up back in episode 2. When Ozu details to them that he told Nao to bring Kirishima and Yoshino to the warehouse he rented, the two men got pissed. What really irked them was Ozu had no belief in their thugs being able to handle Kirishima, but that was a given, since the guy in the white tee was hospitalized for a month after that day Kirishima beat him. Ozu currently had his men watching the hotel where Kirishima was staying, and he told Nao to bring Kirishima to the warehouse by 10 p.m. Then suddenly, the red-haired thug next to Ozu tells him Azami has just arrived in Osaka. This man was someone Ozu wasn't particularly fond of hearing about. Over the phone, Yoshino recaps what happened to the thugs that were hired by Shiori Akaza. The thugs must have a grudge against her and Kirishima, explaining why they've come all the way to Osaka from Tokyo. She then explains that after exchanging contact info with Nao yesterday, she staked out the mansion in Kobe that Ozu rents. Kirishima knew where the place was, and gave a note to Nao telling her they were leaving. But hearing Yoshino spotted a red-haired guy with a perm, he got a little nervous and told Yoshino to head home. while the men she and him beat up from before probably recognize her. There was a good chance Ozu didn't, since Kirishima put in the legwork to make sure her face and information didn't spread much. Instead though, she told him he'd be doing as she ordered. Riding his bike, Shoma stops to check his messages with Yoshino, and he's upset because she wouldn't let him tag along with her. He then suddenly gets a phone call from Kirishima. Kirishima explains he told Yoshino to hide in room 211 of a karaoke bar in the West District, also sending Shoma the map details. He wanted Shoma to pick her up while he took care of business elsewhere. Shoma gets furious, telling Kirishima if anything happened to Yoshino, he'd make sure Kirishima pays worse than death. So now the two were both on their way. Back at the mansion, we find Ozu greeting Azami with a lot of anxiety. Azami makes little expression, simply moving his eyes to look at Ozu. This was enough to make Ozu cower in fear. After Azami leaves, Yoshino walks up happily to greet Ozu, asking if he remembers her. She went under the alias of Mai Suzuki, and explained that the two of them last saw each other at a social event at Hoyo University last year. He does admit he doesn't quite remember her, but continues to small talk. He looked through social media, having found a small account that might have been hers. He initially thought perhaps Kirishima had sent her here, but dismissed it, knowing it was more characteristic for him to come directly himself. He wasn't a fan of her face, but was certainly interested in her body. At the karaoke bar in the West District, Nao sits inside recounting what had happened. Kirishima took her here because it wasn't safe where he was going. He wished he had blocked Nao's number from Yoshino's phone, but now he had to put in extra work to keep Yoshino safe. Shoma then barges in, annoyed he'd been played with Yoshino nowhere to be found. Nao tried to hand him the cloned phone Kirishima gave her and be done with it all, but Shoma was taking her with him. Outside the room, the thugs who tailed Nao were asking where Kirishima was, and when Shoma hears them say they're gonna mess up Kirishima and Yoshino, he immediately knees one of them. He wasn't going to let any lowlifes say Yoshino's name in a threat. Another one of the guys came swinging with a baton that Shoma easily dodged, before taking the guy out. Then, Shoma punches another who tries to headlock him, and punches the guy out from before. Then, the red-haired guy from before suddenly takes out the first guy, and seeing Nao, he calls her cute and invites her out to dinner. With Shoma pulling her away to bring her along, the red-haired guy asks if he's Kirishima, causing Shoma to tell him to shut up and calling him Curly. Now these two were brawling. The red-haired guy punched Shoma down, pissed because he was particular about how good his perm was. But Shoma didn't care. Where Yoshino was, she was going crazy on non-alcoholic drinks. Ozu decides to step aside, having drank a little too much, and getting a call from the thugs before, he learns about Kirishima disappearing. Yoshino tries going after Ozu, and suddenly gets a call from Kirishima. The two relay to each other what had happened on their ends, and Yoshino is pissed in particular that he and Ozu have been trafficking women in both Osaka and Kobe. She gets really angry, saying he's messing with her territory. So, he decides to tell her what he didn't get to say at the aquarium. He'll be turning 18 on November 13th this year. He never told anyone his birthday before. He didn't have likes or dislikes when it came to food, but he liked eating with her. And he didn't have hobbies, but if she did, he'd like to do them with her. He asks her to marry him when he turns 18, catching her completely off guard. But Kirishima was convinced they were meant for each other. Reasonably, who would accept a marriage proposal in this situation? However, Kirishima believed it was possible for him, since he loved Yoshino more than anyone in this world, and he believed no other man would work out for her, except for him. The two then made a wager to become a couple, since he couldn't marry her at the moment. If he settled everything here with Ozu and the thugs before midnight, and beat her in a game afterwards, she'd agree to be his girlfriend. Standing in a crowd of civilians walking about the fireworks display event, Yoshino is able to spot her target. To catch up to him, she angrily rips her skirt to run better, but is annoyed since it was expensive. The thugs meanwhile are searching everywhere for Kirishima. However, he's able to catch two of them off guard, putting one of them through brutal interrogation. Yoshino spots Ozu being dragged off by one of the thugs, since the two had a disagreement with how they were going about their hunt for Kirishima. Ozu explained his past, meeting Azami Suo, a high school-aged Yakuza who showed up mysteriously one day and handled other Yakuza who were after Ozu. The enemy gang went missing, never confirmed dead, but completely vanished. A year went by with no additional offers from Azami, nor did he ask Ozu for any money. Ozu did his best to figure out who Azami was, but no information ever turned up. Then, after all that time, he suddenly appeared asking Ozu for a favor. The thug headbutts Ozu, not heeding his warning one bit, and then calls out the person hiding who was listening in, which was Yoshino. Elsewhere, Kirishima gets the thug he interrogated to call his associates and give their location. He just laughs over the phone, directly sending where he was on GPS, telling the thug it was too much effort to hunt them all down individually. He toys with the thug a bit, letting him know that even after the events with Shiori, he could have ended them any time, but let them continue to do business in Japan on a whim. He's now decided to finish them all tonight. Back where Yoshino was, the thug is still calling out for her, mistaking her for being Kirishima. She comes right out, and the thug immediately threatens to ensure he and his buddies are going to pass her around before killing her right in front of Kirishima. With him about to go for an attack, the lights suddenly go out because of something Kirishima had been doing behind the scenes. This gave Yoshino the opportunity to attack, but that wasn't effective against the thug, who retaliated by slugging her directly in the face. He was then going to go for the finishing blow, but was instead caught off guard by her calling for Kirishima, who actually wasn't there, and this gave her time to run away. With all the lights out, Kirishima was able to take down the thugs one by one. He made incredibly quick work within the darkness, but was now face to face with Azami. Wandering through the crowd, Yoshino was annoyed that her tooth got knocked out, but still had to make her escape from the last thug chasing her. Luckily, she finds a solution to her problems. All the while, Kirishima tries to ascertain why Azami had organized this hunt for him, but instead of receiving an answer to his question, all Azami did was ask where Yoshino was. With her nowhere to be found, Azami began to take his leave. However, Kirishima wasn't going to let that fly. He tried to convince Azami not to go after her, calling her just another girl, but that didn't work, so they began their fight. Going toe-to-toe with each other, Kirishima gets Azami onto the ground, but Azami is able to get him off. He then begins attacking Azami with a knife, and getting his face mask off, Azami bites Kirishima and pushes him against a tree. Kirishima recognizes him, having no idea who he was initially with the mask and darkness, but now questions why he's here and how he got a new face. And as Kirishima gets pushed back, Azami is able to pull the knife out of himself. The lights then come back on, and now Kirishima has the edge, because Azami wants to leave, declaring he's bored now. Kirishima taunts Azami a bit, questioning why he wouldn't finish their match, and Azami's response was he didn't have time to waste on him. Yoshino escapes to the parking lot, and when the thug catches up to her, she crashes into him with a bicycle. He tries getting up, but it's the end of the road because Yoshino electrocutes and finishes him off. Back at the karaoke bar, Shoma and his opponent are continuing their fight. While brawling, Shoma makes quite an acrobatic move, knocking the perm guy down. Perm guy then gets a message from Azami, and now he's annoyed that they've done all this work and are now getting called home. He calls their match to an end for now, but tells Shoma if he calls him Curly again, he'd be dead meat for real. He then warns Shoma the Yakuza are having a lot of tedious internal beef, and suggests he quit to avoid being caught in it. Back at the event, Ozu gets up with blood dripping down his face, but is now coming face to face with Yoshino and Kirishima. At a bar, Kirishima is insisting he sew up Yoshino's skirt, despite her objections. He really wanted to make sure no one saw her underwear. She wondered how he even got a sewing needle, and he showed the bag from the convenience store he went to just now. He also bought a cold compress to ice her face. However, she had enough, but he didn't. He couldn't believe someone would hit her beautiful face. She reminded him he needed to get over it after the beating he gave that Yakuza. The guy might actually be dead this time. However, Ozu was not here to happily banter. Yoshino brought up the location of Ozu's apartment building, where all the trafficking work had been occurring. It took a lot of work to figure out exactly where it was, given that even Kirishima didn't know. But after a 3-hour stakeout, Yoshino had seen a car with a Tokyo license plate. She followed it to a hotel, where Ozu and the punks who were with Shiori Akaza previously had met up. She didn't know what Ozu's deal was with them, but coming from Tokyo to here all pointed to something involving Kirishima. Despite Yoshino's succinct recounting of events, Kirishima wasn't happy that she got Ozu to eat out with her. Ozu finally speaks, denying any wrongdoings, simply saying he knew Nao and Kirishima had been in a relationship at some point. He claimed that since they seemed to be getting friendly again, he was worried. Kirishima got nervous in front of Yoshino over this. He continued to ramble his innocence with Nao and Shoma arriving. She stopped him from moving forward so she could listen in. Kirishima expressed that he was quite impressed with Ozu managing to walk the line of doing anything illegal, not leaving any evidence behind. He was hoping to shake down Ozu for something, but could never find anything useful. But as careful as Ozu was, his family wasn't quite as so. Kirishima brought up knowing Ozu's father was a major executive at a big company, and that his mother was a freelance announcer who had gotten a position as the main newscaster on a news show starting this fall. They were a model family. However, not so model, with Kirishima presenting a video of Ozu's mother fornicating with another man. She lied to Ozu's father, making the excuse she was at work, and the man in the video sensually whispered that he couldn't believe she had a college-aged son given her body. Ozu threw the phone down out of rage. Kirishima knew it was messed up, but he arranged for this to happen. He thought Ozu was in no position to be mad, given he used women for the same purpose all the time. All Kirishima did was arrange for the same kind of encounter for his mother. That's karma, baby. What Kirishima wanted was for Ozu to dispose of all the scandalous material he had on Nao, and for him to never contact her again. After that, he'd consider what to do with the scandalous video of Ozu's mother. Ozu wasn't done though. His next play was to tell the cops a Yakuza was threatening him. He believed he could easily ruin both Kirishima and Yoshino's lives. Yoshino and Kirishima just looked at each other quizzically. She then told Ozu she was certain she could easily ruin his life too. Even if she couldn't bust him for giving alcohol to a minor, she could find some way to leave marks on his perfect record. He was shocked to discover Yoshino was underage, given she didn't look that way at all. Getting inadvertently called old pissed her off, so she showed her age on her driver's license. On top of that, she added he's got this whole thing wrong. The only people who are worried about getting their reputation ruined were people who had plenty to lose, like Ozu. Yoshino didn't have a single thing she wasn't willing to part with, and she was serious. Ozu was pissed, but he admitted defeat, and now recording from the back made sure he'd hold onto his word. Now that the event was over, Yoshino coddled Shoma a bit, not having seen him beaten up in a long time. He played it cool though, telling her it was nothing really. He was more surprised that she tailed Ozu in the mini-truck. She got embarrassed, making the excuse that it was all she could find and she wanted to get to work right away without anyone finding out. He was annoyed she didn't pick up her phone, and she apologized. She didn't think Kirishima would drag him into this, and she figured he'd be fine. However, hearing her poke at him getting beaten up again, he started grabbing at her face. Elsewhere, Kirishima was escorting Nao safely. She was annoyed with how Kirishima operated and couldn't believe Yoshino had been putting up with it. He was more concerned if Yoshino had said something to Nao about him, maybe calling him a handsome scumbag or something along those lines. However, Yoshino had only called Kirishima an acquaintance, and didn't seem interested in him at all. Nao thought his chances of succeeding with Yoshino were pretty low. Also, she thought Yoshino seemed stupid and had a bad attitude. Kirishima countered, bringing up that Nao was smart, cute, considerate, and good in bed. But that didn't make her special. He'd get into bed with anyone, even total strangers. Hearing this made her slap him, but now she figured he baited her into doing it. Getting in her taxi, she never wanted to see him again and told him not to contact her. He was going to delete her as well. Yoshino came by and seeing her, Nao just scoffed before the car drove off. Kirishima apologized to Yoshino for all that's happened, and she admitted to being impressed he was able to work everything out perfectly. He was just as impressed she had tailed him the entire time using the mini-truck. He didn't know it was her until now, but thought something was off given the mini-truck had tinted windows. She had followed Kirishima the entire time, and the first night they came to Osaka, watched him leave the hotel with Nao. Then later, she ran into her at the college. Yoshino still had no idea what was going on, but she could tell Kirishima was up to something, so she approached Nao. How she figured out Ozu's location? Well, she had Shoma reach out to some real estate agents, and that eventually led to her finding an apartment that had been rented out by Ozu, the son of an Embrace Productions bigwig. When she looked into him, she also discovered he had gone to the same school as Nao, and that they followed each other. It was at that point Yoshino started connecting the dots. Kirishima then brought up the tracking device trinket Yoshino had given to him. She was surprised he figured it out. However, he let himself be careless since it was the first time Yoshino had given him a gift. It was a tracker that cost her 30,000 yen, which she had sewn into the little plush. She now figured he really did genuinely like her. He grabbed her head, telling her it was small. He had moments that were hard to explain. Now grabbing her neck, he told her sometimes he wanted to cherish her, and sometimes he wanted to ruin her. Between the two options, she preferred he cherish her. So he quickly switched up the combo, ignoring what he said earlier to now say he was glad since before, she didn't seem interested in him at all. When he realized she was tracking him, it made him happy. He'd rather she hate him than feel indifferent, believing that gave them better odds of getting together. He then pressed her about what he needed to do to become her boyfriend, since he won her gambit. Yoshino began shaking, not having come up with anything. She decided to challenge him to rock, paper, scissors. Kirishima accepted, which Yoshino took on happily, given she was a pro. However, she lost, so now he was celebrating becoming her boyfriend. She refused though, calling for best of 3, only to lose again. Elsewhere though, a mysterious man was glad to hear they were in Osaka, because he was ready to deal with them. With everyone paying respects to Yoshino's father's grave, Renji places a can of sake on it. Yoshino's father didn't actually like sake, a statement said by Renji, who added his son was likely scared of hangovers. Hearing her father got married when he was 19, only 1 year older than she was now, she was nervous seeing Kirishima in the back. Walking after the service with Tsubaki, Yoshino expresses relief her grandfather didn't notice how banged up her face was, since she was wearing makeup. She still needed to stop by the dentist later and get them to reattach her dislodged tooth. Kirishima suddenly grabs her bag, telling Yoshino he'd be more than glad to hold it for her. Tsubaki then pointed out how the two seemed glad they were able to keep what had transpired in the park a secret from Renji, but pointed out Shoma might still be mad. Tsubaki and Shoma then began to bicker back and forth a little, with Tsubaki dissing brash, playboy Osaka men, while he basically called Tsubaki a loose skank and told her to go back to Kyoto. Ever since the first time Tsubaki came over to Yoshino's place and met Shoma, these two have always coldly traded insults. With Kirishima brushing Yoshino's loose eyelash, Shoma suddenly pulls her away, much to Kirishima's surprise. Later that night, everyone celebrated at the Somei family barbecue, where Renji pointed out how much Kirishima looked like Gaku to the point it was creepy. He felt it was like one of his old pals was trying to seduce his granddaughter, and when being asked about his feelings, Kirishima boldly admitted his love for Yoshino. After getting a good laugh in, Renji started reminiscing about the time he borrowed Gaku's car and crashed it right into the river. The only thing he brought back was one of the side mirrors, which had been taped onto a bike. The whole story really cracked Kirishima up. However, Gaku had the same reaction as Kirishima now. After having laughed his head off, he beat Renji into a pulp. Gaku had always been great at fighting and gambling. Renji couldn't even beat him at rock, paper, scissors. Hearing that last bit, Yoshino wondered if Kirishima had cheated during their match. Takedo then arrived, and Renji got up, telling everyone he had business to take care of. Shoma then got a notice of business he needed to take care of by Takedo as well. Sometime later, Kirishima was called down to the basement to meet with Renji. In the basement where Renji practiced his golf swings, Renji brought up the cool setup that was air-conditioned and completely soundproofed. Then told Kirishima to pay no mind to the blood on the wall. It was from Shoma who had come down earlier. Renji then began to shake down Kirishima from the scar around his eye. Kirishima gave his excuses, much like Shoma had earlier. However, Renji was aware the three of them were at the festival the other day. Smacking Kirishima, he wanted to hear more about the events that caused all three of them injury. He knew a little about Ozu's involvement as well, but still, Kirishima would not give a clear answer. Then, hearing directly from Kirishima that this business had gotten Yoshino beaten up a little, Renji started to viciously beat Kirishima, to the point where he started puking. Afterwards, he ultimately gave his blessing to Kirishima, since Kirishima kept his granddaughter from dying. We then turned to Shoma, who had been smoking in a nearby park to chill out after his beating. Kirishima then smugly comes by, asking if he could get a cigarette as well. Shoma had nothing to say, putting out his cigarette and taking his leave. However, Kirishima nudged his shoulder and stole the lighter with a message inscribed by Yoshino that read, "Stop smoking." Kirishima teased at the fact that she gave Shoma a lighter despite also wanting him to quit. A very Yoshino-like thing. Smoking one of Shoma's cigarettes, he pointed out the disgusting taste. Shoma then aggressively grabbed at Kirishima's wrist, procuring his lighter and cigarettes back. But as he tries to leave again, Kirishima provokes him by mentioning how he and Yoshino were officially dating now. Shoma couldn't believe it, but Kirishima kept pushing it, telling Shoma that he had taken his old job. Renji had always kept someone around Yoshino. Before, it was Takeru, then it was Shoma, and now that Yoshino was in Tokyo, it was Kirishima's job. Kirishima then started poking at how Renji used everyone within the Somei gang. Shoma didn't believe what Kirishima was saying, responding back that no one in the family was being used. They worked for Renji because they wanted to. So, Kirishima continued to egg him on, calling all of the gang members indoctrined by foolish beliefs. Obedient like well-trained dogs. Putting out the cigarette though, Kirishima told Shoma, "She chose me, not you. That means I win." That was the final straw that got Shoma to slug him. Shoma told Kirishima he was off the mark, and that Yoshino didn't belong to either one of them. But Kirishima retorted that was loser talk. All the while, Yoshino had managed to track them down with a GPS device and the stuffed animal she gave to Kirishima. And seeing he was at a local park, she had a bad feeling. And she was right, because the two Yakuza boys were trading blow for blow. With Kirishima getting knocked down, he got up and threw down a knife for Shoma, pulling out his own, saying it was time for them to end this. Shoma initially got the element of surprise, but then they found themselves face to face holding each other's fatal stab back. Yoshino then suddenly intervened, swinging at both of them, telling them to stop, which unfortunately led to her ankle twisting. The two boys tried to help her out, but she struggled off of them. She then had them find their buttons, and with her sewing kit given back to her by Tsubaki, she told the boys to take their shirts off. For punishment, she wanted them to swap shirts and sew each other's buttons back on. She'd done this many times before, because growing up, Shoma was always getting into fights. When uniforms had gotten damaged, she always made him go to the house of the other guy for the same punishment, and this got him to fight less. She already knew Kirishima had provoked this, so she had Shoma flick her head, now telling Kirishima every time he ignored any questions she had about an event, she'd have Shoma hit her exactly like that. This is what Kirishima didn't like about Shoma. He himself would never hit her, even at her request. He also couldn't understand why Shoma told her her outfit from before was just whatever. In Kirishima's eyes, it wasn't whatever. He thought it was totally cute. Aside from the useless ramblings, Yoshino learns that Kirishima had provoked Shoma by telling him the two of them were dating. But Yoshino wanted to make things clear. She actually agreed to date Kirishima so he'd stop picking fights with Shoma, as a way to make things even. He was only her boyfriend because she was looking out for Shoma's well-being. She then had Tsubaki take Kirishima back so she could chat with Shoma privately. While the two sat together, they talked about how stupid this whole thing was. Yoshino was losing her mind, not certain on how to go about this whole dating thing, wondering what kind of man was truly right for her. To this, Shoma answered, a man that could kill him. This made her wonder if Shoma actually liked her, but he just scoffed it off, calling her statement gross. However, handing back his mended shirt, she expressed that life with him wouldn't be so bad. If the two of them got decent paying jobs and both saved up, they'd probably be okay in old age. Shoma thought the idea sounded good as well, and that living with her would be pretty fun. This made her scoff, and now joking that if they were going to do that, he'd have to quit smoking. Returning to everyday life in Tokyo, Yoshino for some reason ignores Kirishima at pretty much every instance he tries to talk to her. When Sota brings up that she came back home with Kirishima on a particular day, she just smiles, responding she came home alone, completely ignoring Kirishima's existence. Kirishima supposes it had to do with him fighting Shoma back in Osaka. He calls Tsubaki that evening to chat about Yoshino ignoring him, because he's been ringing her doorbell incessantly for the last hour to no answer. Tsubaki lets him know he really pissed Yoshino off. She used to occasionally ignore Shoma the same way when he had done something to upset her to this extent, and that it was just best to watch Yoshino for the next 24 hours. The next morning, he tried to bring Yoshino some chikuwabu to eat. He then tried to offer her Madeleines with lemon custard. By the evening, he had made her a cake, still begging to see her, shouting while smiling that he felt like he was going to die from not being able to talk to her. He was ultimately depressed, not seeing Yoshino at all for the last 48 hours, and his Yakuza family members were shocked at the array of desserts he had made. He was having a little fun at first, but now, he's worried at the idea of being ignored by her for over a month. He's losing his mind, asking Aoi if Yoshino caught a disease where she's only able to recognize certain people. So, Aoi tried to knock some sense into him. Kirishima tried reaching Yoshino once again, with it beginning to storm. He continued to sit in front of her door, soaking in the rain, until Yoshino opened the door, asking what he was doing. However, he was stuck on her gorgeous looks. The alarm on her phone rang, signaling it had been 3 days now, so she was ready to talk. But only if he understood what she was mad about. Of course, he didn't though. She made it clear that from now on, he wasn't allowed to contact Shoma without her permission, and that even if Shoma picked fights first, Kirishima was not allowed to fight back. He folded immediately, much to Yoshino's surprise, meaning the silent treatment must have been really effective. She went with this method since every time she wanted to have a serious talk with him, he usually offered an empty apology, and when she yelled at him, he always seemed into it. She started to dry his head off with a towel, telling him that from now on, she didn't want him dragging everyone else into his business. If he was going to drag someone, she would rather it be herself than anyone else. He accepted her request, then suddenly picked her up, admiring her beauty in comparison to the sun goddess that came out of the Ama-no-Iwato cave. Not seeing her after all this time reminded him of just how beautiful she was. He felt like he could stare at her all day. He was also pleased to see her wearing a dress he had bought for her. The two continue to have a pleasant talk, where Yoshino brings up that she doesn't usually use the gifts Kirishima gives her, just in case she needs to sell them for his potential bail money. She did this for him and no one else, because she couldn't imagine anyone getting into as much trouble as him. She didn't even do this for Shoma, because despite how he acted, he was doing fine in life. Kirishima actually agreed. He knew older people were fond of Shoma, and younger kids looked up to him. Shoma was definitely hardworking and also sociable if he needed to be. He thought of Shoma as being a model Yakuza, unlike himself. He believed himself not to be suited because no one trusted him, and he also didn't trust others. Kirishima didn't have any long-term friends, and other guys were never fond of him. This was why he intended not to become a Yakuza. Yoshino was shocked to hear how attentive to detail Kirishima was about Shoma. Putting Shoma aside, he brings up how much he enjoys his time with Yoshino, how she stands out. It's like she always faintly glowed in his eyes. She then asked him what would happen if he met someone he enjoyed more than her. However, he responded that wasn't possible. The two then talked of having friends, especially since Kirishima never really had any. Yoshino told him she had a normal school life, with a normal amount of friends until middle school, where her upperclassmen started to pick on her because of her height and family. They must have thought she was full of herself. Halfway through the first year, Shoma came around, and from then on, people stayed away from her. In response, Kirishima started to bring up his experiences. There was one time he made a serious attempt at making friends, but it didn't really work out. He wished he had grown up with Yoshino and been childhood friends with her. To this, Yoshino suddenly tells him, "You're my boyfriend now, though." He gives a look of surprise, then laughs, saying, "You know, you're right. I guess I am." She had no idea what a relationship entailed, so she asked him to lead. He suggested they start by holding hands, and offering hers. He started to feel her small, cold hands with his big, scarred ones. They were a little scratchy and rough, so she offered him some lotion. But something strange came over Kirishima when he applied it to Yoshino's hand. He started licking it right from her palms, and she headbutted him in response. He apologized, saying the hand cream looked like whipped cream, and she shouted at him, not wanting to hang out for the rest of the night. On the news the next day, Yoshino learns a dump truck crashed into her family gang's office back in Osaka, declared as an accident. She's a little worried considering she can't reach Shoma at the moment, but when Kirishima comes to chat, Shoma finally picks up. Shoma explains everything's fine, but he didn't expect Kirishima to hit speaker and to ask questions about the situation. Shoma lights a cigarette while explaining he overheard some of the branch Yakuza were beefing. Apparently, the head of the Kirigaya Gumi had been arrested last month. and with him out of the picture, the families were getting riled up. With Yoshino's grandfather Renji being third from the top, he was quite busy trying to deal with this. Renji was quite familial with his fellow from a different family. However, this man was not the same with him. The man then called out to this blonde man, who planned to take care of Renji. And getting up for his ride, we see blood on his sleeves from an earlier job. We then transition to Perm Guy finding Azami lying on the ground. He didn't really care that Azami was a little battered, and presented him a flyer for third-year students' entrance exams. Later, Kirishima is seen getting desserts and flowers. Coming into Yoshino's place, he suddenly drops them, seeing her lying on the floor. He finds out she was just sleeping, and places his jacket on her body, then lies beside to just stare at her. What kind of ending was this? There's so much to develop, and you know what? I'm a little unsatisfied. Subscribe to the channel to follow when I cover Season 2, if it comes out. Also, watch this next video. It's me, ComfyTea. I'll see you all in the next one.